In our seventh webinar, Where's the Burden of Climate Variability in Vietnam?, our speakers reflected on the many issues faced in the pursuit of climate adaptation and security in the country. Our speakers gave their thoughts on the best way to mitigate the impact that the climate has on the most vulnerable and to put a halt to the increase of the divide between the richest and the poorest. Let's have a look at what they had to say.
Invest in the infrastructure, because here we have very limited infrastructure for the climate impacts and the natural disaster risk management. Another solution is that we support the local in social and economic development planning to attract investment and develop human resources and attract other tourism also.
Invest in adaptation, resilience and preparedness. So equipped the people with information, with money, with tools, with education, so they can adapt with the climate change pattern.
From my perspective, it's important to mainstream climate change risk in planning and budgeting processes. And that means, like, especially in a very rapidly developing country like Vietnam, it is important to already consider which kind of areas will be affected by climate change in the next 10 to 20 years. So you avoid placing new infrastructure projects in places which will be highly exposed.
Try to create, a better and more equal opportunities so that, all the different, sectors in the economy, and fruitfully, to economic growth. Yeah.
We need to open space for the uncared worker, for the informal workers who can access to the public service, to increase their opportunity to join formally to the decision-making process at a local level.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 8th Climate Security webinar. My name is Grazia Pacillo, and I'm Senior Economist for the CGIAR Climate Security Focus. The Climate Security webinars series are part of the Climate Security Focus of the CGIAR, where we are aiming to link climate impacts to its drivers of security. In today's and last week's event, titled Charting the Path to Peace, we aim to shed light on some of the latest policies and initiatives, working to ensure that all people in Vietnam and Indonesia have equal opportunities and resilience to climate variability. This event is part of the research project titled Climate Variability in Vietnam and Indonesia, funded by the European Union and the French Agency for Development Research Facility on Inequalities. Today, our focus will be on Indonesia. About 40% of the population in Indonesia faces high mortality risks due to multiple climate hazards, such as tsunami, floods, landslides, drought, and earthquakes. Climate change has increased the occurrence of many of these hazards, such as drought in the Southern Islands. It has increased the severity of floods and cyclones across the country and fastened sea level rise in the coastal areas. Average temperatures have increased steadily in the past 40 years, and by 2060, it is expected to increase between 0.9 and 2.2 degrees Celsius. Annual rainfalls have also increased by 12% in the past 30 years, with an estimated further increase of 15% in the next 3 to 4 decades. Wetter and drier seasons are expected, especially in those regions south of the equator, including Java and Bali, which will increase even further the occurrence of climate hazards in the country. A USAID 2015 study estimated that by 2050, the total cost imposed by climate change in agriculture, health, and gradual sea level rise in Indonesia will equate to about 1% of today's Indonesian GDP, roughly $9 billion. This is only a partial figure, of course, as agriculture is not the only sector that is and will be impacted by climate variability. The rapid development of the past decade in Indonesia has moved a lot of people out of farm activities to wage and non-farm employment in urban areas. Some of these people are most marginalized and disadvantaged, such as migrants, women, and low-skilled and educated young men and women. Due to lack of resources and opportunities, these groups are bound to be the most exposed and vulnerable to climate impacts. Despite its rapid and sustained economic development, Indonesia has become the 6th country with the greatest wealth inequality in the world, with the 4 richest people having more wealth than 100 million poor people in the country altogether. Economic inequality is reinforced by inequality of voice and opportunity, with the poorest excluded in favor of the rich. Failures to protect the poorest and the most marginalized from climate impacts in both rural and urban areas will create the condition for poverty traps and further social exclusion, ultimately contributing to widen the gap between the richest and the poorest, and creating the conditions for the insurgence of grievances and insecurity. Studies of direct impact of climate change and variability and inequalities are limited, as the literature mostly focuses on the direct effect on poverty and treats inequality as a secondary consequential issue. Poverty and inequality are, however, very distinct phenomena and often follow different patterns. As demonstrated in Indonesia, where sustained reduction of poverty has been achieved in the past, despite increasing inequality. Furthermore, a large majority of previous studies analyzed the relationship between climate and inequality across countries, with less attention to how different groups within each country are impacted by climate hazards. In this paper, we use a within-country approach to dig deeper in this relationship and trying to understand whether climate variability has a bigger impact on the most vulnerable groups in Indonesia, and whether this contributes to increased inequality in the country. In other words, we ask, is climate variability regressive? Or better, does climate variability impact impacts more on those who are less able to cope with its consequences? And if so, what can we do to ensure an equal, sustainable, and safe economic development for all in Indonesia? The results of our analysis show that the effect of climate variability is indeed regressive in Indonesia, as the impact of changing climatic conditions is not equally distributed, bringing disproportionately higher impacts upon farming households and on the poorest and most vulnerable people, who are less capable of coping with climate hazards. We find lower coping capacities to be linked with demographic factors such as age, gender, and education, with rural women, elderly, and less educated suffering the most of the consequences of climate variability. As for the case of Vietnam, some of these households often depend on transfers and remittances to deal with the impact of climate shocks. These strategies, however, seem to mostly focus on the short term, while long-term uncertainties remain. The climate impact on inequality is therefore clear for Indonesia. Our analysis finds that there is a clear evidence that climate variability increases inequality, with this effect becoming larger in those provinces that are mostly populated by poor and most vulnerable households. In conclusion, we strongly believe that understanding the direct relationship between inequality and climate variability is, as for the case of Vietnam, of paramount importance, not only for the socio-economic development in Indonesia, but also for stability and security. A recent paper published in 2020 shows that there exists a clear relationship between inequality and conflict in Indonesia. Therefore, the inequality challenge can really become a national security threat for Indonesian people, if not timely addressed. Despite many efforts have been made in Indonesia to tackle the rising inequality, existing policies often had little success in addressing the needs, the rights, and priorities of the most marginalized people. For instance, the so-called bottom 40, rural women and unskilled people, who are not usually covered by the social assistance targeting database. Our study contributes to this discussion and suggests that more real-time evidence is needed on who bears the biggest impact of the climate events, and asks for an increased effort to monitor these impacts, specifically for remote rural agricultural households who are often left behind. We also believe that short-term solutions are not enough. Developing sustainable coping and adaptive strategies with and for the most vulnerable groups in both urban and rural areas will be essential. This is especially important for women, elderly, and low-educated people in Indonesia, who are the ones who are bearing the biggest burden of climate impact. Providing voice and representation to these groups will be pivotal for an equal and peaceful development for all in Indonesia. Now, before introducing our speakers and starting the discussion, I would like to invite you all to watch a short video on the importance of understanding the linkages between climate impacts and peace and security across the globe. Thanks.
Debates continue to take place on whether and to what extent climate plays a role in exacerbating conflicts. Outside of these debates, the complex interactions and feedback loops between climate and conflict are a major threat to livelihoods, affecting millions as we speak. This is likely to worsen in the future. Climate change is a reality, and its effects will be profound at a global scale. Understanding and addressing these complex interactions between climate and conflict is likely one of the keys to achieving long-lasting peace. Until now, we have not addressed conflicts with a climate-smart approach and the urgency the matter deserves. Climate and conflict experts have much to improve in how they collaborate and exchange with each other. Finding common ground among the different perspectives is crucial. The way to address the complex connections between climate, conflict and peace is to adopt a systemic perspective towards food systems and natural resources, focusing on the key interactions for science and policy making that are central to long-lasting peace. We invite you to join our CGIAR Climate Security webinar series with live and interactive sessions connecting science and policy in the context of climate security and conflict. Our goal is to highlight the importance of developing sustainable food systems and natural resource management as a foundation for long-lasting peace.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Leon Goldberg. I'm editor of UN Dispatch and host of the Global Dispatches podcast. Today's conversation about climate variability and inequality in Indonesia is being recorded as a live taping of the podcast. In Indonesia, most farming households live below the poverty line and rely on agriculture for their subsistence. Therefore, climate-induced losses on crop and livestock productivity are inherently regressive in nature. They can severely worsen the life of the poorest, further increasing economic inequality. As Grazia explained, the paper we are discussing today finds that climate variability reduces household income, and communities experiencing extreme temperatures see their income affected the most. The impact of climate variability on income is also most acutely felt by female-headed households and older populations. And these are just some of the key findings that we will be discussing today. Our conversation today is a dissemination event that is part of the research project Climate Variability in Indonesia and Vietnam from the EU-AFD Research Facility on Inequalities, developed with the financial support of the European Commission and the coordination of the French Development Agency, AFD. The research initiative presented today is a complement to other climate initiatives in Indonesia that AFD supports, such as a non-sovereign loan to strengthen the capacities of the Meteorological, Climatological, and Geophysical Agency, BMKG, for marine meteorology data acquisition and modeling, and 2 credit lines to PTSMI dedicated to adaptation and mitigation of climate change, with some allocations to health and social projects. And with that, let us get into our discussion today about the intersection of climate variability and inequality in Indonesia. And it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Athia Yumna is Deputy Director of Research and Outreach, the SMERU Research Institute. Welcome. Mubariq Ahmad is Country Director, Conservation Strategy Fund, Indonesia. Welcome. Maliki is Director for Poverty Alleviation and Community Empowerment, Ministry of National Development Planning, National Development Planning Agency, Bappenas. Welcome. And Henriette Faergemann is First Counselor, Environment, Climate Action, and ICT, Delegation of the European Union to Indonesia. Welcome, everyone, and let us just jump into our conversation, and we'll go to you. Can you tell us a bit? Thank you. Welcome. Can you tell us a bit more about the government of Indonesia's efforts towards inclusive economic growth and how these initiatives will contribute to climate adaptation, inequality reduction, and ultimately economic and social stability? Also, I feel obliged to ask you because Indonesia is in its final year of its term as a member of the UN Security Council. In your view, is there a connection between inclusive growth and regional stability?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So, well, Bappenas has already completed our medium-term development plan, and we are implementing for the 2024 now. So in our medium-term development plan 2024, it's already mandated 7 national priorities for the next 5 years. That is actually consistent with 3 pillars of inclusive growth. By continuing to develop the infrastructure as a priority for the last RPGM, we also put development of human capital as our main priority. And then in the regional context development, we also put more emphasis on reducing disparity among regions by inventing new sources of growth for the locals and also the national context. So this medium-term development plan will be implemented also consistent with the SDGs agenda. And our RPGM, it will be based on the principle of integrations, holistic, spatial, and also thematic approach to invent new economic centers, especially in the other islands. Now Java is the center of the economic growth. And then we hope that in the next 5 years, it will shift to the other islands. So in the other hand, environment and also natural development, building stronger resilience from natural shocks and climate change is part of the 7th priority and prioritized. Yeah. By considering the development constraints and also intergenerational responsibilities, which mainly are the carrying capacity of the Indonesian regions, we should also utilize all the natural resources as optimal, smart, considered as possible. So therefore, not only we aim for the higher economic growth, but also we attempt to reach more sustainable single-digit poverty and also low inequality. That will be as a strong base for us to eradicate the chronic poor poverty as mandated in SDGs. So then our objective goal is now to become upper middle income country that is just, prosperous, and also sustainable by end of 2024. And by this goal, we have to reach low Gini ratio as well as the high human development index. So then we will have a base for becoming developed countries in 2045, as in the Vision 2045. So for the next questions, there is a very positive correlation between poverty, inequality, as well as the economic growth. Higher inequality that provide too large gap between the poor and also the non-poor will impinge negatively on growth. The inequality will provide negative perception, especially to the investors. Thus, this will make a lower potential growth. So a large gap between economic growth that is initiated by large gap education attainment, large wealth ownership, and even large gap social inclusion between the group in the regions will potentially create social tension and political tension.
Thank you.
In the last sentence, Indonesia is one of the biggest populations. So then if we create as an examples for the large diversities of languages, ethnics, and religions, but still can create equal opportunities for all. So this is an example for us, and then hopefully we can create stability, political stability in the regions.
Thank you very much. And Henriette Faergemann, I'm going to turn to you now. Over the years, the European Union and Indonesia have worked together on issues related to economic development, good governance, and the environment. Can you tell us more about this cooperation? What are some of the key initiatives on climate and inequality that you are working on? And how have they helped to address issues of climate change and inequality in Indonesia?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this webinar. So indeed, the European Union and Indonesia, and I would say more widely also the ASEAN region, are really good partners for climate action and for the protection of the environment. We have, of course, an ongoing policy dialogue. We have a lot of trade and investment between our two parts of the world. And we are also implementing a lot of concrete projects on the ground. And I would like to just mention a few of these that are of particular relevance to the conversation we are having today. The first one I would like to mention is a project that is supporting the ASEAN Farmers Organization on food security. This is part of the work that we are doing on sustainable consumption and production. And the aim of this project is to promote the local food varieties and to increase the economy of the true production and marketing innovation. So this is obviously very important in a changing climate context and something that can help stabilize the income sources of the population groups that we are working with. Another example is a project that is called CRIC, C-R-I-C, which stands for Climate Resilient Inclusive Cities. And this is related to the vulnerability, of course, in the urban sector. This project will work on, or is working on, supporting the development of early warning systems for disaster and climate hazards in the cities, something that will be instrumental in terms of helping people live with and adapt to a changing climate. We have a very big project in the ASEAN region on peatland management. And for those who are not experts on this topic, I can tell that managing is something that is extremely important for helping mitigate climate impact. And then finally, I would like to mention a project that works on ocean governance, which is particularly linked to restoration of marine ecosystems and marine protected areas, and is working closely with the communities that are living in these areas. This is just some of the examples of what the European Union delegation is doing, European Commission, European Union delegation, but of course also all our EU member states are working very actively on these topics. And the aim is that we would like to bring all of these activities to have a true partnership between the European Union and Indonesia, where we can collect these best practices and help disseminating them with the much wider community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Athia, Yumna, I'm going to come to you now. Based on the SMERU research and on your experience, can you help us understand how serious a problem inequality is in Indonesia? And among Indonesia's population, what groups are bearing the biggest burden of climate challenges today?
Mark, thank you for inviting me. So I think the issue of inequality in Indonesia is becoming increasing concern after the reform 97-98, once the financial crisis. So now inequality in both rural and urban area actually tends to accelerate after the reform 97-98, with the exception actually in the last 4 years where the trends of inequality is slightly decreasing. And but all this time, the Gini index in terms of expenditure in the urban area is always higher than that of the rural area. So, and then the last figure we have on March 2020 in early pandemic, even though total inequality in Indonesia is slightly decreasing, but inequality in urban area actually is slightly increasing. So this can be an alarm for us that the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic actually hits the urban people more. And for your second question on who bears the biggest burden of the climate change, Grazia told us previously that the poor and the vulnerable, both in rural and urban areas, who are the hardest hit. Why rural? Because this is related to their livelihoods, because most of the poor in rural areas still rely on the agriculture sector. Climate change in the past few years, in the past trends indicate a low capacity for rural people to adapt to changes in climate. And same stories may happen to the people lives in coastal area, the fishermen. So they are the group who are most the vulnerable and the most poorest in the coastal area, who will bear the burden of change in climate change, such as sudden rises in temperature, and they will require them to sail further from the shore to catch fish. So this is the kind of vulnerabilities they bear. So why urban? Because this is related to special issues of poor living in the urban area. They are prone to disaster, floods, droughts in Jakarta, Medan, Bandung, home to more than 1 million people, respectively. They are posed the greatest threat of natural disaster. So I think those both rural and urban areas should be our concern. I mean, not only in rural, but also in urban, people live in informal sector, rely on informal sector also bears the burden of this climate change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mubariq, Ahmad, I'm going to turn to you now. So earlier this month, the new job creation law was approved by Parliament, and it's expected to substantially change Indonesia's labor system and natural resources management. And there have been some intense protests against this law. Can you help us understand what are some of the implications of this new law for agriculture, climate resilience, and inequality, and more broadly, security in the country?
Okay, so thanks for the questions. Well, first of all, about this law that is called Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja or Job Creation Law. The first thing is that we need to appreciate the Indonesian government intention to bring in more investment as a way to create more jobs. That's definitely a good idea. And then there are some provisions we have heard from Pak Maliki about the easiness of improvement in the easiness of doing business, including for the smallholders and small scale companies and enterprises. However, when we look at the details of the law, it touches more than 70 laws. It changes more than 70 laws that was in effect before. And then if you look into the implication into each of the law, you would wonder whether the intention match the provision that is explicitly put in the new law about what changes are being affected. So there are a few things well noted. There are some controversies about the labor benefits, about the contractual arrangement, about the compensations. People have different opinions about it, but generally the labor group believe that the law actually make life less easier for them. The second part is about the implications for the environment. It is very clear the law on this job creation watered down a lot of environmental provision in Indonesian economic life. It makes the what they call the environmental license that used to be separated from the business license now being combined based on the risk. And then what was before termed as license now being changed into 3 categories. There are license for high risk business, and there are approval for the medium business, and there is a self-declaration that the company will comply with the rules. And then this kind of self-declarations is of course very dangerous. And then we are seeing in many other parts that there will be a much easier way of government of business player abusing the environment, because the criminal sanctions against the environmental crime is now abolished. All that was all problem that can be termed before as an environmental crime, now it becomes an administrative mistake. So consequently, the fine being imposed on that, if it is proven, it's very small. So if you ever heard of that 7.6 trillion of fine on a company that is burning 20,000 hectares of forest 2 years ago, now those under the new situation, the sanction, the fine will be maximum 10 billion rupiah. And then for that, with that comparison, companies can easily burn forests, convert forests, and it will never be termed as a crime. And then they will only be fined administratively. And this is really worrying, because that will ease up the destroying of the nature in Indonesia's context by the corporations, as we have seen in many examples.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess this one closing. And then of course, as usual, when these things happen, the land acquisitions becomes easier, and then always to the disadvantage of the less powerful people on the ground.
Well, thank you for that analysis. That was very helpful. Let's turn to Athia Yumna again. So the paper that we're discussing today shows that remittances play a key role in mitigating the impact of climate variability on the incomes of older households and female-headed households in rural communities. In your view, can remittances and transfers be a valid long-term coping strategy for the climate crisis? And if so, what are the common issues and bottlenecks that Indonesian policymakers should address to ensure that these strategies are sustainable and available for those in need?
Okay, my short answer is no. Remittance and transfer are not the long-term coping strategy. We need more structural and strategic or policies that can deal with this situation, because the report says that the problem of this female-headed household and older people is the last mile people. Yeah, so we should have more and stronger affirmative policies for them in terms of this inequality, poverty, vulnerabilities, and this related to this climate change issues. So yeah, my answer is my short answer is no. The remittance and transfer are not the long-term coping strategy. We need to work harder to fine-tuning the best strategy, more strategic strategies, strategic policies, and also the social protection system that you know protect them from this kind of burden.
Thank you. And Mubariq, Ahmad, we're going to turn back to you again. The analysis again in the paper shows that low-skilled and rural female-headed households are bearing the burden of climate impacts. In your view, what can be done to ensure an equitable and sustainable act for all, and how can capacity building efforts for the elderly and less educated help them cope and adapt to climate challenges?
Yeah, let me focus on the first part. The social protections that Athia mentioned should first start with the recognition of people's rights over natural capital. That's the bottom line from my point of view. So the government should stop all the displacement as a way of improving, as a way to increasing investment in this country. So We have been developing for 70 years, and we are still doing displacement in order to develop corporations and business. So I don't think, no matter what we do to empower people, as long as displacement take place, the equality will never be there. And then people in the rural area will always be in this disadvantageous position. So protecting social, social protection should start again with this protecting people's right of natural capital. And the very first one of that is land ownership. So if you look at what happened, this is the part that is the government is not doing in a very bold way, so to speak. Yes, there are programs that government is doing that they call the social forestry and agrarian reform, but the speed is way from what was promised before. So I guess the other part, the capacity building, the other one, of course, it helps here and there, but the fundamental is protecting people's assets as a way of getting the legitimate income.
Thank you. And Maliki, we're going to turn back to you. Your department is responsible for ensuring equitable and inclusive growth for Indonesians. And I know that you have a roadmap for the implementation of national social protection policies. Can you help us understand how these policies will help the most vulnerable in the light of the current climate crisis? And a sort of parallel question to that is I'd be curious and want to know your view on the role of Sharia finance to reduce inequality and promote efforts to mitigate the impact of climate variability on vulnerable populations.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Actually, on the roadmap itself is going to be established and revised after responding to our COVID pandemic crisis now. Because this outbreak of the novel coronavirus will actually threatens all the entire gains in reducing poverty. So both way, in parallel way, we responding to this catastrophe as well as on how we can build stronger resilience of the poor people into from the natural shocks and also the climate change. We are actually mandated to reform our social protections starting from 2021. So these reformations will consist of 6 important aspects, which are improving quality of data, which already mentions about all the vulnerable groups that is maybe not included in our data, and then strengthening the integrations of the social protection programs, especially for like integration from the social assistance and also the economic empowerment. And then sharpening the delivery mechanisms, digitations of social assistance, development of adaptive social protection. That is the last, the last one is actually very consistent what actually we can cope with the current climate crisis. And the 6th strategy is actually to have more sustainable financing mechanisms. So this reform is consistent with what actually already put in agenda for the medium-term development plan, with more emphasizing on creating sustainable strategy to increase the resilience of the vulnerable groups. That includes elderly and also the people with disability. So let me emphasizing on the first aspect, which is data, so that we need to complete and also improve the quality of data of these vulnerable people. And then this way we can put more strong integrations between the programs. That also enables us to respond faster to the shocks during gradual shocks such as the climate change. And for the second questions, zakat and wakaf is actually other philanthropy funds. It will moderate the social gaps, what the government has been targeted. So we see the zakat can be an option for a breakthrough for creating innovative model for poverty alleviations. So if we pay attention to the strategy detail actually in the Holy Quran, that we teach people how to fish rather than giving the fish. So we really hope that zakat redistribution is not only providing people with in-kind assistance, but also empowering their economy. So while Wakaf has a lot of possibility, Wakaf can direct it to stimulate development of real sectors, improving social services, and also more importantly, to support sustainable environmental considered national development. There is actually a few examples of Wakaf that contribute to alleviating poverty and reducing the inequality. Like in Jambi provinces, as one of the provinces in Sumatra, they built electricity building from hydropower, supported by collecting funds from individual zakat. So it's provided actually quite a lot, like 800 households from 4 villages with strong electricity. So that's my answers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Henriette Faergemann, I'm going to turn to you now. From your experience, what are some of the most effective policies, initiatives, and measures to mitigate the impact of climate variability on the most vulnerable, and which of these would best fit the case for Indonesia?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, we are now in the middle, of course, of a huge crisis, the COVID crisis. And I would say that the next crisis, or the ongoing crisis, the other ongoing crisis, is really the crisis of climate security. We just need to look at the burning of the Amazonas, the burning in Australia, Siberia, and here in Indonesia, melting of the Arctic, the flood and the droughts, and the increasing temperatures, and all of these issues that to really see that we are sitting on a ticking climate bomb, I would say. And this, I think, does really pose an unprecedented threat to the global security. There are going to be huge economic consequences of all these changes that we see. And it's really very important that we find good ways of dealing with this. So I would like to mention just a few things that we believe are really crucial for this. First of all, I think we need across the globe, between us and in our individual parts of the world, we need holistic, green, and strategic ways of managing these risks. So we need to continue to gather information and analysis, and that's why I'm very happy with projects such as this one, to understand really better how the climate security concerns can be integrated into all the relevant policy areas. This could be from conflict prevention to development, from disaster risk reduction to investment and budget allocation, and really to see how we can put mainstream climate into all these areas. We need a greater coherence, a greater coordination, and I would like to just mention one of the most recent policy developments in the EU, what we call the European Green Deal, which is an attempt to try to bring all these things together and develop a true globalist framework where we bring energy, transport, circular economy, food production, and a number of other policy areas together in one batch. Then the second thing I would like to mention is really the working together. I think our common security fundamentally depends on how all of us as big emitters can come together and deliver on our climate commitments. We are already well underway, both here in Indonesia and in the EU and other parts of the world. But it's important that we need to ramp up our climate ambitions and to really make sure that we deliver on our Paris commitments. Then the third thing I would like to mention is investment and trade. So achieving the global growth expectations that we all have collectively will require, some estimates say, up to $590 trillion in infrastructure investments by 2030. Failing to align this with the Paris Agreement goals will really fundamentally undermine the opportunities that we have for global climate security. So we need to have investments that are fully aligned to the climate objectives, and really make sure that is the priority of our new investment. We are looking between the European Union and Asia, we are looking at a new connectivity strategy to try to connect us better in all ways. And I think this is the kind of a start to build on really, that we can build on to make sure that turns into reality. We are, as the European Union, really trying to make all our trade relations green. And I think that is also going to be the trend for our talks in the future. So thank you for that.
Thank you. So over the course of this conversation, and also as it is evident in the paper, it's clear that climate variability exacts a heavier impact on the most vulnerable, and that strengthening of climate resilience capacities of the most vulnerable is necessary for broad-based sustainable development. So I have the same question I will pose to each of you, and it's this. Cognizant of the increasing climate challenges, what would be the two things that you would prioritize to mitigate the impact of climate on the most vulnerable and put a halt to the increasing divide between the richest and poorest in Indonesia? So two ideas, two thoughts to leave us with. And Maliki, I will start with you.
Okay. As earlier mentioned, that we are in Bappenas, has an effort to develop the adaptive social protection to protect the poor and vulnerable during emergency situations. So in our medium-term development plan in 2024 has targeted the adaptations of ASP by 30% of national and also local government by 2024. So there are three critical elements of adaptive social protection stated in our medium-term development plan. First is combining and integrating social protections, disaster risk management, and also climate change adaptations in a comprehensive adaptive social protection approach, specific to the context of Indonesia. And then the second one is strengthening the social protection institutional system to be more responsive to socioeconomic risk due to the climate change and natural disasters. And then the third one is development of a sustainable adaptive social protection financing scheme to overcome climate change and natural disaster risk. And the ASP roadmap development process is actually consists of several phases. The earlier phases include stakeholders mapping, and then institutional framework development, stake talking analysis, hazard, exposure, and also the vulnerability assessment, as well as the gap analysis. So the final phase will focus on finalizing Indonesia's adaptive social protection strategy, including the ASP options development, ASP formulations for the poor and vulnerable, and also completing the roadmap itself. So that's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Athia, Yumna, to you now. Could you give us two ideas, two suggestions, two solutions perhaps, for how we can reduce inequality and also combat climate issues in Indonesia?
Okay, Mark. The first one, I think it's in line with Maliki has said before, that we need to create a social protection and social protection system that is sensitive to the needs, livelihood condition, and vulnerabilities of the poor according to the spatial context of the group. So we need to utilize also all data and information about spatially based poverty and vulnerabilities, such as the distribution of the poor and the location of slums and so on and so forth. So I'm really looking forward actually to this transformation of our social protection program, as Pak Maliki mentioned, to be more adaptive, that combine those three elements of social protection, climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk mitigation. And then, of course, obviously, this will be hard work for many actors and stakeholders. So coordination is the key words here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this transformation. And the second one from the people side is how we educate people to cope, especially the most vulnerable one, to cope with the climate change, to minimize the hazard and increase their resilience. This and at the end, it will how to increase their adaptive capacity as well. So I think this is also will be another hard work from the people side. So this will also be many actors and stakeholders work as well.
Thank you very much. And now, Mubariq, Ahmad, we'll turn to you for your 2 ideas and 2 suggestions.
Okay, I would mention first about the mitigations policy and implementation, and the second part about the jurisdictional approach to low carbon development that is now being promoted. So on the first part, I think in this context of it is good to mention that the Indonesian government has just finalized the renewals of letter of intent with the government of Norway, which serve as the basis of further implementations of REDD plus program, reducing emission for deforestation and forest degradation. So I hope all the EU countries can join that type of arrangement also, and that will be very encouraging for us and the Indonesian government especially to seriously implement REDD, which has been hanging around for a while. So with this program, there are 11 priority provinces that have had their own plan, but seems to be forgotten because the government keep delaying the implementations of it. Now with this new spirit, I hope it can be renewed, but of course with the challenge from the new law on the job creation. So there is a conflict there. And then the very fundamental thing about this REDD implementation in Indonesia is improvement in land governance, including about protections of natural capital of the people. So related to the mitigation strategy is also government needs to pay attention to the energy sector, in which we should shift to non-oil palm based renewable energy. Because if it is depending on oil palm based, then there will mean more destructions of the forest. And certainly not friendly to the climate. So the second ideas that I would like to promote here is that what has been being done by about 12 kabupatens within the roundtable of sustainable kabupaten. There is this circle, so to speak, roundtable for sustainable kabupaten. One of them in which we are working is Kabupaten Sintang. In this place, they are really implementing the low carbon strategy wholeheartedly, changing their plan, changing the policy, including scaling down the oil palm plantation size. The previous government has given like more than 500,000 hectares of oil palm license. Now it is being scaled down to only 200,000 hectares. And then along with that, the Bupati is leading the improvement of all cooperative small-scale arrangement about the partnership of the small-scale plantation with the big ones to promote this equality. So there will be no more cheating between the company and the people through these cooperatives, so to speak. And then what is also interesting in the Kabupaten is that in terms of food security, they are trying to localize, to promote the permanent rice farming through the power of the women's group. I would like to mention this, and there are some powerful women's group there. There has been showing some success story about protecting forests, moving toward permanently resided farming, and then with that they are improving the family incomes and bringing better educations for the family. I think if that examples can be followed and promoted and copied by many other kabupaten in Indonesia, we will have we will be heading toward what we call a more resilient and more equal development toward the future under a less severe climate change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now, Henriette Faergemann, we will turn to you for final thoughts on two ideas, two suggestions from your perspective that could help reduce inequality and confront climate change as well.
Thank you very much. I think I will, with the risk of repeating myself, I would again say holistic and green strategic management of planning. And then I would also say really to emphasize the need for all our infrastructure policies and plans, budget to try to include resilience to climate change and be in line with the Paris commitment, so the 1.5 degree temperature goal. So I think there's a lot we can do, all of us, to really strengthen the way that we make green investments, and it's something that we as the European Union is very committed to working on across the globe, but also here in Indonesia. The European Investment Bank has a very, very strong climate agenda. They are about to set up their shop here in Indonesia, and I think we can already confirm their big willingness to work on climate-friendly investments here. And I very much support the comment that was made previously on really focusing on renewable energy. We know that renewable energy is always more cost effective. It creates more jobs. It is simply a better idea than conventional energy at this current time. So to look at our investments, our budgets, our plans, and in a holistic way, and to focus on this, I would say that's my 2.5 ideas.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for your contributions today, for answering my questions. I appreciate your time. I am now going to turn the screen back over to Grazia, who can offer some concluding remarks. So Grazia, over to you, and thank you all again.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to our speakers for this very interesting discussion indeed. This is the final debate on charting the path to peace, a side double event to the CGIAR climate security series, aiming at linking climate impacts to each drivers of security. With our first webinar on climate variability impacts in Vietnam, we reached hundreds of people around the globe, and I'm sure that we will also reach many more with today's event. The increased and widespread interest in these topics clearly demonstrates the need to provide a platform where reflections around climate impacts, existing risks and threats, and socio-political security can be discussed. And this is what we aim to do with our webinar series. Creating opportunities for knowledge sharing and collaboration is vital. It can help saving the lives of millions. And on these, the science and the technologies that CGIAR and other research institutes produce are very important. In our today's event, it became clear that climate threats are exacerbating inequality in Indonesia, and that increasing inequality can have a tremendous destabilizing effect across the country. Therefore, tackling the climate inequality nexus will be a clear future challenge for Indonesian policymakers. In addressing this challenge, I would like to underline 3 main points that I felt were important in our discussion. The multidimensionality and complexity of inequality in Indonesia are a concern. Despite some improvement in the past few years, disparities between urban and rural areas are of a concern. Nonetheless, inequality patterns are very complex, covering different geographies and demographies in the countries, and not only the rural and urban divide. This should be taken into account when studying and addressing the inequality challenge in the country. The second point is that remittances and transfers are not a sustainable strategy for coping with climate impacts. A social protection system that is sensitive to the needs, conditions, and livelihood of the poorest and most vulnerable is needed. And the adaptive social protection system promoted by Bappenas seems to go towards this ambition. However, social protection systems are not enough. Social protection policies are not enough as long as displacement of rural population is in place. More needs to be done to enforce what is called the right to natural capital, first of all, land, for the poorest and most marginalized. Improving evidence is, of course, important. This is my third point. Strengthening the data collection exercises that reach the last miles to ensure that our understanding and knowledge on who bears the biggest burden of climate impacts is essential. Further analysis, vulnerability assessment, and almost real-time gathering are needed. Like those of previous debates, we hope that today's reflections will inspire policymakers and practitioners to seek tangible solutions that help millions in Indonesia and throughout the world in coping and adapting to the climate security challenge. Thanks again for joining us. This event concludes for now the CGIAR Climate webinar series. Stay tuned for updates and on future events. News and updates on these and other ongoing work can be found on our homepage, climatesecurity.cgr.org. Thank you and see you soon.